Hello, this is John Solomon with the Cybersecurity Advisors Network. Welcome to the latest iteration of our long-running interview series with interesting people in the information security industry with something relevant, timely, and fascinating in this case to say. And today I'm joined by Evard Driehuis. Evard and I have known each other since 2014 when he was at an intelligence provider. He is currently, correct me if I get this wrong, the chairman of the board of CSIRT.global.
Yeah.
Excellent. I get my memory is serving correctly here. A Dutch-based not-for-profit entity that he will tell you a little bit about shortly. I wanted to talk to Evard because we were conversing about a related Cybersecurity Advisors Network initiative called the GFCRC, or Good Faith Cybersecurity Researchers Coalition, which has as its goal to support legal protections for responsible cybersecurity researchers and disclosure. Obviously, for the CSIRT community, this is strongly of interest because, like industry, they are dependent on a reliable and consistent flow of vulnerability information. And that originally got us talking about potential collaboration between the organizations, and also brought Evard's new role to my attention. So, and I thought this, given the fact that CSIRTs and CERTs are one of the core constituent type of organizations of the global cybersecurity industry, this is a great segue into a conversation with somebody who has a lot of experience in the European, EMEA, and global sector. Hear his thoughts on a couple of relevant issues and to exchange views on basically anything relevant to the current state of the cybersecurity industry and sector in the region. So Evard, welcome to Netherlands. Welcome. Thanks very much for joining us today. Would you like to give an introduction? Who are you? What's your background? What are you doing?
Sure. Yeah. Thank you so much, John. And wonderful to speak to you again after several years. I remember some of our adventures way back. And it was a very interesting time, wasn't it? And maybe we'll get there later. So my background, I have been in cybersecurity since, before the word cyber was invented. It sounds like a long time. It probably is. It's over 25 years now. The truth be told, I started out in IT. I was an IT guy. I was in boots in the mud. I was an IT support guy first, sysadmin later. I did projects later, Novell, Microsoft. I got my NCSE, as you did in the 90s, and then moved on to Linux and so on and so on. And but later on, I got dragged into these kind of jobs that kind of needed you to manage stuff, and got in leadership roles progressively, starting with team leads and so on. And from there, I stepped in the 2000s in the noughties, stepped into cybersecurity. I met a gentleman called Ronald Prince at a party, and he asked me to join Fox IT. I actually remember the way he asked me, or the way I remember it probably falls after 15 years, but he asked me if I was technical in any sense, because I was by then a senior manager in an IT company. And I said, well, I like to think I am. So, and then he asked me about if I ran a server at home. And I did. It was back in those days. It was Apache, Nginx wasn't widely spread as. And I was running Apache, and he asked me about my OpenSSL implementation for some reason. And I actually could answer his questions, so maybe that was part of why he asked me to join his company, Fox IT, which was back then internationally quite unknown, I think, but that would change 5 years later or so. Yeah. So that's a little bit of my background. After that, I worked at a large MSSP that was called SecureLink. SecureLink was acquired by Orange Cyber Defense. I started out in a research capacity and then moved on to be their chief marketing officer. And that was a fantastic time. I think that might be the most enjoyable job I had, because I had so much fun. The people were so wonderful. And Orange Cyber Defense as well. I found them fantastic people, very knowledgeable, very friendly. After that, I moved on to a startup called Cybersprint, and I worked there for 2 years. Just a few months ago, Cybersprint was acquired by Darktrace, and I started out for myself, and I'm now an independent advisor. But as a side job or in my spare time, I run this organization called CSERT Global. So that's me.
That explains actually a lot, because I didn't actually know you came from a technical background, because one of the things that when we first met back in 2014-15 that I found so impressive is that you were, I assume still are, but the one of the best, if not the best, sales guy in the information security industry that I know. not just in terms of commercial success, but really somebody who gets it, who knows how to talk to people. So that explains that. So, but
Interesting.
Finally, no.
But the interesting thing is that only once in my life have I actually had a sales job that had sales in the title. I've usually had jobs that were, I would say, on the bridge between the technology and the customer, whether it be in marketing or product marketing, product management. Those jobs I did way more often. But I had one time I did hold for, I think, 1.5 years a sales job as well. But I always say, John, and there's a little bit of marketing for myself, is I always said I have a tech heart, a design mindset, and a business drive. So yeah, there you go. That's my personal marketing, my personal branding there.
There's a wonderful expression in German which roughly translates to do good things and talk about it. And this is our experience when we were at events that you had organized was you combined that very well with also knowing when to step back and letting the content take over, and really giving a good contextual introduction, managing the human side of things, but also being able to say, okay, now it's time for actual letting people look at what we have, not the product, not the services, but actually the information, and letting you make up your own minds. Because that's
I agree.
I always have with vendors, is to make sure, like, look, you don't need to sell anything. You've got your techies, you've got your analysts and your engineers. Find the ones that can talk to a crowd of human beings and let them do the talking for you, and just introduce, and then go and socialize during the drinks evening afterwards.
Yeah, I agree. I think me personally, I always have a respect for people I talk to. I'm always assuming they get it, right? I'm always assuming that they're smarter than anyone thinks, and that that allows you to have a proper conversation instead of just ramming your message down their throats. And if you're I think one of the fallacies you see sometimes in storytelling is if people start to drift off or nod off, it's not because they don't understand what you're saying. It might be because they're uninterested, and And one of the worst things I think you can do is to start, ramming your message home to people that have disengaged or be bored otherwise. And I agree with you. You can often, if you assume your audience has some knowledge, and if you assume they know what they're talking about, they sit there for a reason. They weren't forced to sit there. They're interested in the topic for some reason. So assume a little bit of their intelligence. Makes it easier.
One of the best things you can do, I think, is read the room and understand when you should shut up, and again, let the subject matter experts take over. So now on the topic of that, I mean, through your last couple of roles, you're obviously very well versed in the threat universe, the threat actors, types of various types of malware. In your previous iteration where we first got to know each other, you guys had a couple of bread and butter families of threat actors.
Yeah.
How did this? You guys were very focused on a couple of specific groups, as I recall, a few others. How did that kind of being able to get a close-up view of the mentalities, the methodologies, and also the tactics, techniques, and procedures, or TTPs, shape your attitude towards dealing with the threat and vulnerability landscape?
Yeah, a lot actually. It's an awesome question, by the way, and but also a question that can get us in the rabbit hole quite, very deep, because there's so many adventures I'm very proud of and sometimes a little bit shaken by still. But so we were, of course, this was in my Fox IT days. We were blessed with really being the one organization, and this was before the times, Flashpoint didn't exist, Intel 471 didn't exist. RSA had some kind of a threat intelligence department, but they gave it away for free with their anti-fraud products. So, no one really, didn't really trust the free products. And for some reason, we got this really, really good visibility on this group of Russian-speaking criminals, which we always said were responsible for about 80% of all the attacks being done globally. In those times, working with affiliates with just in its infancy wasn't done that much, so they were involved with most of these attacks themselves directly, and we learned so much from that, including also, for example, and this is later on became very important, that, for example, they started sharing their attack types and their access with spies, for example. So these had completely different interests. Like the criminals, they just want to make money in whichever way possible. But the spies are, of course, interested in being, not making a mess and not, breaking like the elephant in the porcelain room, breaking everything. And they want to stay hidden and so on. But they were sharing their methods. And we saw these groups, like you said, like the Game Over Zeus group, was actually dabbling a little bit in espionage. They had so many affected endpoints that they could just run a query over all of them, looking for example, documents with for secrets in them, or government documents that were classified, or just doing word matches for certain terms, including certain countries and so on, and running those over the same botnets that they were using for perpetrating retail banking fraud and ransomware. So that was very interesting. And the thing is that back in those days, even for me, I did understand that if you are a hammer, everything you see is a nail, right? So I definitely was under the impression that these criminals were probably not 80, but 95% of all the badness in the world came from them. But of course, there was a huge aspect of espionage, nation state APT, that we did not have visibility into. But as this started to creep together through these TTPs that you speak of and these methods, and we actually got a little bit of visibility in that as well. And it was only later on that I started to understand that just making use of how bad the internet is technically, the internet is in bad shape. It's put together with duct tape and bubble gum. It is a total mess, and it's a miracle that we can be productive on it at all. But we are, and we're reaping the benefits. And increasingly, we see that these vulnerabilities and these weaknesses of the internet are increasingly now used for criminal purposes and for other malicious purposes as well. So, and this is a different approach. It's quite a technical approach, and I'm learning more and more about this every day now. Yeah,
I find it interesting the point you make about expanding almost use cases for malware attacks. And I had a very interesting series of conversation with a couple of military cybersecurity actors, where the focus on who is committing the attack, I think, is far more important for the public sector, law enforcement, defense, etc. actors than it is for private sector actors. because one fundamental philosophical difference that really jumped out at me was that, and this is a vast generalization, in the private sector, you mostly care about who is committing an attack in order to understand their technological approach so you can counter it effectively. The only reason you care about their methodology is so you understand the best, most effective, most efficient, and quickest way to defend against it, respond to it, and recover for it. Whereas if you're in the public sector, you're empowered to essentially impose force or to strike back. You're going to be much more interested in, whether it's a state actor, state affiliated, state sponsored, or simply pure monetary criminal actor, right? Can you talk a little bit about the types of motivations that you've seen in this regard? So you mentioned a few moving into espionage. Do you see any trends arising recently that are interesting to note?
Yeah. So let me think about that a little bit. So, well, I think we all know the lists, right? And the lists, like, you have your nation state actors, they want to do espionage, but for different reasons. If they're, let's say, if they're either from Asia, they're probably after your secrets. And some people, including people from Secret Services, sometimes say, listen, these are really my favorite adversaries. Because they're gentlemen, really. They don't make a mess. They don't burn down the house when they enter. It's a lot of fun working against them.
I love the way of putting that, because it makes a lot of sense. That if you're dealing with professionals whose objective is not to ruin things, like a rat.
Exactly, and that is a huge difference. But also, it's. What's important is that, of course, the public, and this is more a political problem or a society problem than anything else, needs to be educated that ignoring this will be death by 1,000 cuts. It's because when a ransomware actor destroys your company, this is something that is very, you need to, this is a life and death situation for your company right now. And so the impact is very noticeable, and there you go. But if a spy manages to infiltrate your network and exfiltrate data, then for, let's say, trickle out data for months or even years, and then after 3 years would copy your interesting concept, but only do it cheaper and maybe even better based on your initial seed of an idea, it would put you out of business. But then of course, the connection between what happens years later with the information that is being stolen due to espionage and the initial access, what you're defending against, that connection is often lost and broken. Right? So people don't see this. It's the same as with health, right? If your leg's broken, you're going to go to the emergency room for a cast. That's all logical. That's dealing with ransomware. But if you're slightly overweight, and have a high cholesterol level, for example, we probably need to eat a little bit healthier, maybe sleep more, and maybe drink more water or exercise more. And that's the difference and the difficulties of dealing with those kinds of adversaries, is that it requires discipline and diligence, and not so much the agility or the crisis management that you need in order to deal with these actors that break your leg. And I think, I think that's one of the important things, is that society needs to understand that the second one is just as dangerous, maybe on the long term even more dangerous, but also it's not only a risk for you, it's a risk for society.
I think for example, a lot of members in modern society have it almost sounds a little silly, but it's not, have been disconnected from the sense of being part of a collective strength, right? You have a stake. You may be cynical, you may feel disenfranchised, but you have a stake in the society around you remaining stable and secure.
Yeah, no, that's true. And let's say, as a society, we're digitalizing at the tremendous rate. I believe the country where I happen to be from is one of the is the most digitized country in the world. But that also means that we're the most vulnerable country in the world. Everything's connected. And as Miko always says, everything that's connected is vulnerable, and it's true. Right? It's what we see with Cesar Global as well. But that means that in order to, we have so much benefits from that, even though the internet is, it's built on duct tape and bubblegum, we benefit from it more than the downsides that these attacks have. But the scales might flip, right? It might happen. And then what you're going to do?
They already have, and I think this is a really important point that you make, that you play at, which is if you take the American elections from 2016, right? And I'm not going to mention specifics, but we've had several, for example, separatist, independentist, whatever you want to call it, movements in Europe, several, political extremist movements in Europe that were outright, if not outright, financed by the Russians, definitely supported by disinformation, destabilization campaigns. And there was a really good point made by a former U.S. intelligence, grand poobah, I forget his name, I'm trying to look it up, who said that you cannot create divisions in society, but you can definitely exploit and exacerbate them. And we've seen this, and that even if you as an individual citizen or data controller or whatever you want to call it, if you specifically as an individual are not interesting to a state actor, for example, seeking to create division in society, you as part of an overall statistic definitely are. And I think this is where we see maybe an increase in state actors not only going after industrial espionage of large corporations, looking for IP, what have you, or for weaknesses in critical infrastructure such as power generation, oil, natural gas pipelines, aviation, but also going after individuals as part of an overall body of information that can then be used to manipulate, for example, public sentiment or blackmail or steer policy by having a better understanding of habits of individuals as part of a group that could then be used to undermine the stability of this digital society.
Yeah, and that gives another problem because when we're dealing with ransomware as bad as it is, or even espionage, your detection methods are vastly different and so on, but there's still stuff, lateral movement in essence. If you're smart enough, you can detect it. Initial access, you can in some way detect it if you can predict what it looks like. It has observables. But dealing with information warfare, that's a whole different ballgame altogether. I think the vast majority of the cybersecurity industry, including myself, have not even thought about solutions to these these problems. And where can you buy an anti-information warfare tool, right? Where is that stand at RSA?
Well, that's a really good point, because I remember I was at a presentation by a intelligence agency from a European country I won't name, talking about basically they were going after physical espionage, right? Physical industrial espionage, and just I'll come right out and say it. This is Chinese Ministry of State Security employees basically going in and stealing information outright from Western quote unquote companies, and I think the sheer scale of and the brazenness of these thefts, right? We're not even talking about attacks or sabotage or trying to find weaknesses in critical infrastructure. This is just outright information theft for competitive advantage. As you say, if you're management of a Western European, for example, or American whatever bank, or an Australian, a power provider or whatever, how do you even measure the financial loss compared to the immediate financial loss of a ransomware attack? And that in the information security industry, we've really only just gotten to the point where we're able to measure, we're able to assign financial loss metrics to risk management frameworks. How would we be able to measure the impact from these more insidious, more systemic attacks on the society and the citizenry as a whole?
Yeah, exactly. And it's like it. I think most organizations I know still consider it black swan events, that for some reason public opinion gets influenced in such a way that the company gets impacted. Well, yeah, that's a black swan event. Who would have known, right? But indeed, what would be the technology that you needed to put in place in order to monitor that? I know there is, from out of the marketing tech field, there is some reputation monitoring tech available, of course, and this is just measuring on the socials how people are talking about you as a company. It's of course what every large company does or probably should be doing, but this is a marketing tool essentially, and it's now being repurposed for cybersecurity. But that is essentially the best we can do. We are dependent on these big tech platforms, and you can definitely not see anything that is not connected to one of these big tech APIs. And even these APIs from these big tech guys, we now know can be closed at a snap of the finger as well. So
let's not even start.
Easy.
Certain, I'm not going to name any names, but let's be honest, certain social media platforms that definitely should be putting a lot more interest in monitoring these trends, but have been demonstratively used on multiple occasions in the past for example, disinformation campaigns, if not outright spreading of whether it's hate messages or I don't think malware so much, but the not technical undermining of security on a societal level, but more the kind of informational undermining.
Yeah.
And not necessarily in their interest to do this. Maybe the cynic in me says, because it undermines the very business model that rage drives engagement, drives revenue.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I saw that as well. I think that it has nothing to do with cybersecurity, but as someone who was born in a world without any technology to speak of, connected technology, that is, of course, we had the wheel and rockets and cars and do stuff, but no internet. And I've seen this grown, and this worries me as well. It's worrisome.
Thank God I'm not a teenager today. I don't know about you.
But that's totally true, because if you talk to teenagers, I don't know, John, do you talk to teenagers? What?
I don't have any teenagers around. I have 9 cats. So
right. So there you go. So I talk to a teenager, specifically my son, a lot, and their world is vastly different from the world that you and I were born into. These people have absolutely no. Their future outlook is so different, but so accepted as well. They can't. Mortgages is something that is an alien concept for them. Something that other that the boomers have, but maybe not them ever will have. My son is adamant of the fact that probably before he buys his own house, if he will ever do that, he probably needs to move a few hundred kilometers to the east because of global warming, right? And that's his reality. That's something that modern teenagers live with. And it's important for us to understand you well.
I mean, on the information security front, one thing that does fill me with confidence is that if you look at Generation Z or Generation whatever comes after Z, I've lost track. They are, I hate the term digital natives, but it really makes sense. And in addition to them being much more dependent on, and I think susceptible to the vulnerabilities in and threats to at a systemic level, these digital platforms that they see as their playground, that's their home. I think they're also much more literate, organically than we ever were, because for our generation, I'm also at the generation that kind of had to switch over from non-digital to digital. These guys grew up in it. So I think whether it's disinformation, whether it's online scams, whether it's malware, I think they're probably in that sense. I think the kids are all right. I think
I think so too. I think so. But the one thing I think that's very much different is that I think people up to a certain age can have feel that life and online are two separate worlds. But the generations after us, for them, it's all fully integrated, right? If you're for some reason your Fortnite account is hacked and you lose all of your skins, for some teenagers that is like the worst thing that can happen. That is worse than your house burning down, right? And this integration of digital assets and digital life and community is really totally integrated. So that means that vulnerabilities in these systems that they live in, right, are having way more impact on them as well. And I think that's something that, like something like a simple vulnerability, we need to deal with hundreds of them on a monthly basis. They can be more impactful for young people, I believe.
I want to come back to this, but I mean, first I did want to touch on your comments about the internet being held together by bubble gum and sticky tape and rubber bands. There's a definite argument to be made there, and my thinking is that maybe one of the reasons why we haven't seen, we've seen BGP hijacking, we've seen system-wide attacks that have caused massive disruption, everything from way back in the dark ages, from Code Red, SQL Slammer, all the way now to, Log4Shell and friends. But the recent spate of attacks and vulnerabilities haven't really so much addressed the fundamental functionings of all things of the internet. Why is that? Is that maybe because all potential actors see this as, well, we have to use this as well, so we maybe, excuse my French, don't shit where you eat, so we're not going to try and sabotage. But then again, there's always going to be people who have nihilistic tendencies and want to watch the world burn. So why haven't we seen more, just wanton destruction of this underlying communications infrastructure we all depend on?
So that's a good question. I need to guess, of course, but I would say the internet is as technically bad as it is still the highway that even the bad actors use on a daily basis as well. If they destroy their own highway, like you say, they can't get to work anymore. So there's that. And also, one of the interesting things is, for example, this is what we saw with the ransomware criminals. These guys also, especially the moneymakers among them, so the entrepreneurial cyber criminals were just in it for the money. They want to come across as very trustworthy. They want to deliver. They want to make sure that anyone that pays up to them and they give them the files back, and they said, well, it was a bad experience, but in the end, all the dealings with the criminals, they were actually very, very good, and they were very helpful and supportive of me paying that money. Though these criminals really want to have that good reputation, because that then spreads. Well, if you pay them, you can be sure to get your files back. So for them, it's of course that. But then if you're looking at, of course, if you're looking at cyber warfare, geopolitical, then of course destruction would be way more logic. And we have some of course seen some isolated, or well, not really isolated, but we've seen worms escape. 2 times already. We've seen WannaCry, we've seen NotPetya, which of course had to do with Ukraine as well. It kind of escapes from Ukraine. It was targeted on Ukraine, but everyone knows the story in way more detail than I do. But this destruction is really the geopolitical event, cyber warfare event, and I'm reckoning there's a balance there, that we need the internet to keep functioning. Otherwise, all of our supply chains break down. And if supply chains break down, life breaks down and warfare breaks down. So we can't destroy it.
Well, that's with we, but maybe not the bad guys. I think the really bad. And by the way, if you're a ransomware actor, you'll never be a good guy. Die in a fire. We all hate you, and your mother's not proud of you. So I want to come back to this, just my personal views, not those of my employer, which is myself. I want to come back to your comments about Fortnite. And I think despite the maybe superficially tenuous connection, there is definitely a link to what you just said about the underlying functionality of the internet and the possibility of a widespread systemic disruption as well. And by the way, if my lighting keeps changing, it's because I'm trying to adapt my ring light here. Got sunshine coming in the side here. Sorry about that. This is maybe something from your CSER.global hat. You guys do vulnerability communication analysis as well. When you see somebody affected, you tell them. Do you think the future will see a greater degree of, that's a stupid question. Let me rephrase that. I think the answer is obvious. But I think the future will see a continuous increase in the degree of automation in the detection, analysis, and creation of countermeasures for vulnerabilities. Can you talk a little bit about how you have seen this progress? Is this something that you guys are implementing? Is this something that the industry as a whole is implementing? And how do you think that is affecting threat intelligence analysis and communication?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So of course, I deal with vulnerabilities on a daily basis, right? Let's take a step back. As CSER Global, we deal with vulnerabilities. We are aware of the pressure that the internet is under. We love the internet. I do. I can still imitate a 9600 baud modem with my voice. As you should, but I love it and I want to save it. But I also know that if you try to do all these things at once, and or maybe you're trying to influence policy and so on, I think the most direct way to do it is just focus on one thing and do really well and be the best at it. And that's why we focus on vulnerabilities. We know there's more to the threats on the internet than vulnerabilities, but you need to start somewhere, right? And so in focusing on vulnerabilities, we see a lot, and they're so different. And the impact to systems and society is so vastly different with every vulnerability you see. And one of the biggest learnings I had is also in working with our sister DIVD, is sometimes they just start research based on a hunch. Right. For example, one of them guys was working with MSPs and said, well, a lot of these MSPs use this software to remotely manage their customers. Right. It was called Kaseya in this case, but a bunch of other ones exist as well. So potentially, if you get admin access through that tool to all these IT systems, well, imagine what happened if a bad guy would have that. So they started investigating. And then they found like 7 and previously unknown vulnerabilities and disclosed them with Kaseya and so on and so on. It's well documented. Google it. It's a fantastic case. But the importance is that if you would scan that particular vulnerability, right, you would find maybe several thousand instances. But these vulnerable, let's say MSPs, for example, they would have access to dozens of customers each. So those measurable vulnerabilities would ultimately upstream put tens or hundreds of thousands of companies at severe risk. And this is, I think, the difficult thing with vulnerabilities is that you can't measure the impact by numbers, for example, and you can't, that it has a CVE score, maybe of 9.6, well, sounds really bad. It's very close to 10, but doesn't necessarily mean what the potential impact can be. And the one thing that I do see is that everyone and their grandmas are now leveraging this automation in attacking, right? If there is a vulnerability, or if there is a weakness found somewhere, the bad guys and the good guys will all start their scanning. If you have a nice proper infrastructure, you can scan the entire IPv4 range in under a few hours. So all the bad guys will have all.
Don't do that, please.
Yep, but don't do it unless you have, I don't know, someone tells you can do that. Um, so the bad guys have all of that information. A bunch of good guys have that information. So it's a rat race. Then, the rat race is between the informing. Listen, you have this service. It has an RCE. Take it off the internet until further notice. And the bad guys will use a POC script they find somewhere, adapt it, or create their own, and start putting their backdoors in those systems. It's a rat race. And with the recent lull, for example, in Russian language cybercrime, there were.
I wonder why that is. You think they may have something else, some better things to do right now?
Well, off the record, I have spoken to some people who told me yes, that they might be on some special projects, but of course that that link is pretty well researched and well documented. So
didn't mean to distract. That just occurred to me.
But because there's kind of a lull in activities, we now see a new kind of criminals popping up. Well, if we're not getting our infected machines from those suppliers anymore, we need to find our own. And what's the easiest way to do it? Well, we start scanning and find those vulnerabilities and just putting backdoors on them, and we'll leverage those as our initial access. And there is, there's I think the other day I saw some research by a well-known company, but they said, listen, these actors are really reusing these super stupid methods to get initial access, and that is through vulnerability. So, I'm talking for a long time, but it's so difficult. The impacts, I feel uneasy about all of these vulnerabilities, and especially our capabilities of handling vulnerabilities. I know from my own my professional practice, that there's way more companies that can actually inventory, find their vulnerabilities, but they don't have any IT staff to solve the vulnerabilities. So now,
would it be safe to say then that you're going to increasingly see a scale of different levels of value in both creation or finding of vulnerabilities as well as remediation? So the actual discovering them, the creating the analysis is more likely to be a manual, artisanal, scientific pursuit, whatever you want to call it. But the exploitation of it, the detecting of it, and the remediation of it, once you know it, is increasingly going to move towards automated tools.
Oh yeah, sure. Yeah, for sure. So if you can detect it, that's. Yeah, and all of the good guys, we can do it. If we find a vulnerability, there's ways of detecting, well, where is it? Where it's likely it's here, or it is actually here. And then you can probably, if there's an RCE, you can remotely exploit it. So that can all be automated, and it will, and it has. That for sure. And the problem is, of course, the asymmetry is in the fact that the organizations that own those systems, they buy all of these vulnerability management tools, and now they know they have a crap load of vulnerabilities, but they don't have the actual people to solve the vulnerability. So they focus on, well, just give us the top 10 or the most risky things. And sometimes, the tools are wrong, of course. There was one that was actually number 29 on the list. You would never get there because you only have so much hours in a day. But that still was the one that was actually later on leveraged for that given attack, and that is an increasing problem.
Well, this is I think another area. I mean, talking about automation, I really think that once you know the vulnerability and the potential impact or the severity, I'm seeing a lot of startups and established companies are going towards automated remediation. Basically at least creating crutches for companies to not replace their skilled security staff, neither their analysts nor their incident responders nor their admins, but to basically give them tools to make themselves more efficient. And it's a regular broken record rant of mine that if you're a company management that seeks to replace your skilled IT and security people with automated tools, go run a B&B, because you shouldn't be in management. You should not be in that role, because it's not a replacement, it's a support. And what I want to build, sorry, that was my personal opinion here, but what I want to build on here, I think, is it's this whole thread comes up to, I think, my final question for you. And this is the bogeyman in the room. I've asked about, will automation, is automation increasingly playing a role in finding vulnerabilities? You're the indication that you're giving me is that in your experience, it's more in terms of remediating known ones or exploiting known ones. What about AI?
Yeah. Well, yeah. Well, I think, and in what sense? Do you mean in finding or predicting vulnerabilities, or
predicting, finding, etc. It's the stuff that,
like I said. Yeah. What I believe is we don't have a problem finding vulnerabilities. I truly believe that, right? It's like something that we're already really good at with some proper tech that has been around for 20 years in detecting vulnerabilities. You just take all of your stacks, your network vulnerability, and so on and so on. The problem is managing your IT, right? Your shadow IT, the IT you didn't know existed. That's your problem. That's how can you scan something if you don't know it's there? That's your problem, right? And if you're, that in combination with, and then with regards to remediation, automated remediation, that's wonderful for a subset of technology that can handle automated remediation. But many of the more critical IT, you need to see that in business context, right? What if you can't just automate remediation on an MRI scanner, right, in a hospital, or on a critical sensor, on a water lock, right? We're putting everything online first, right? We're then learning okay, so this works, it's wonderful, we're super happy. Now it's down. Okay, so we're learning to deal with that. Oh, now it's hacks. Oh, we're learning to deal with that. It's always, we put it online first, and then we're learning how to deal with all the consequences of putting stuff online.
But Ewout, that's precisely my point. It's that these things are not panacea. I keep using that word recently. They're not replacements for people. They are crutches to make them more effective, exactly because of the example of the MRI scanner, right? You cannot, and I think this is what we're also seeing in terms of a lot of SaaS tools, where they're not even claiming to replace the human presence. They're just giving the human presence a tool to identify, to classify, to prioritize, and make more manageable this list of issues. But my concern is, my question is that, AI is the thing right now. If we're not talking about certain banks, everybody was talking about ChatGPT before they were talking about SVB. That seems to have died down a bit. But you say that, finding vulnerabilities is not hard. Well, I mean, it is hard, but it's not like, Nobel Prize rocket science. We have tools to do that. They're fairly mature. Do you think not automation, but quote unquote intelligent technology will increasingly see a role in terms of doing things like predictive analysis, in terms of impact analysis, and taking some of the human factor in terms of, for example, contextualizing the impact of a vulnerability or a threat? And if so, any predictions in regards of how we'll see that develop?
Yeah. That's again a good question. My crystal ball remains a little bit blank on there, but let me say something about what you said earlier. I am a firm believer, firm supporter of any AI-driven solutions, right? As long as, again, AI introduces another level of risk, including the training data. Where does it come? what's the bias available in the training data, and so on and so on. Yeah, we're learning those lessons and so on. But I am a firm believer that will save you a lot of time and effort. The one thing I don't see is the complexity, even in something as simple as vulnerabilities. Like I said, it's not just programs that are broken and need an update. It's not that simple. It's about shadow IT as well. It's about business impact. It's about systems that are critical in processes and so on and so on. It is all of that combined that allows you to, that needs the automated remediation process to be adapted to the type of technology that it mitigates the risk on. The companies I work with really own the many of the, let's say, the SMB companies are not thinking along these lines, right? They're not buying threat intelligence. They don't have a SIEM SOC. How are we, if we want to change society, we need to find out a way in order to help them as well. Not do the next big innovation that is available for the happy few, and they will probably benefit and learn a heck of a lot of it. They will have a lot of fun, but in the end, is that technology going to be suitable for an SMB? Is it going to be for a 100 people organization? Because whether we like it or not, in this world, out of anyone who has a job, 80% works in a company that is 50 people or less.
Especially in Europe, I think that's a very often overlooked point, that a lot of this stuff, a lot of these technologies and even methodologies aren't accessible for the kinds of companies that make up not only the bulk of our economy, but also are among the least capable in terms of resourcing and knowledge.
Yeah.
And I think, sorry, go ahead, please.
Yeah, and that is exactly one of the reasons why CISO Global exists and DIVD as well, is that this is a rocky road for anyone, right? Including all of those people working in small, medium businesses. And what we try to be an organization, at least, that is there without prejudice for anyone that normally doesn't have access to those wonderful, expensive CERT teams that you can hire for 300 euros an hour in order to mitigate the threat that you inadvertently cause yourself. That's why CISO Global is there and needs to be there, because this kind of practical system, like the cyber firefighter function that we have, is often not provided by governments as well. Again, they focus on the happy few. There is few governments that supports SMBs in their cyber troubles. So that's why I believe this is important.
Well, I think that the concept of critical infrastructure has while it has led to a lot of benefit in terms of guiding public sector, such as CSIRT, NCSC, etc., support for key industry functions, and an understanding of the vulnerability of these, bubble and sticky tape infrastructure components we all rely on. I think it's a very good point that very often a lot of the companies that individually may not be super critical to society, but there's still a story to be told on their own. They have stakeholders, they have customers, they have employees, and they're very often susceptible.
Exactly. And if you're a 49 people company, every month you need to pay the wages of 49 people. So that means that every month you have a fair amount of money that passes through your account. And if these let's say these new kinds of criminals that use the stupid methods like the scanning and so on to gain access indiscriminately, if they get access to your organization, they see that you're a 20 people company, they will hold you ransom for an amount that you kind of can pay. They do it automatically. They don't do any manual hacking. If they're
you're an easier target. You're an easier target.
There you go. Yeah.
And
yep. So yeah.
I think it's also interesting. You made a really good point also that about things like asset inventory and resources.
Yep.
A lot of vulnerabilities we face, a lot of the issues we face as a result of vulnerabilities, they're not technological. The technology is simply a symptom, but these are management issues. These are process.
Oh yeah, for sure.
We know the vulnerabilities, but if you don't have the process or the capability in place to deal with once you know them, or even know whether they affect you or not because you haven't invested, then you have a deeper problem. Yeah. So
I agree. And it's not for nothing that the first, function in NIST is identify. And as part of identify, you need to have an update an asset inventory. And what do you know? I would say the vast majority of internet dwellers don't do this, right? And this gets you vulnerable, that you have that you update maybe not every week or every 2 weeks, maybe not so risky as not knowing what your assets are.
Yeah. It always gets me a laugh at conferences when I ask that question. But as you point out, your smaller companies, the ones that collect individually aren't that big or important, but collectively really form the backbone of our economy. They probably are not even capable of some of these basic functions. So, I want to wrap up on that note. Do please visit CSIRT.global. I very often make the point that our Dutch colleagues are well ahead of the game, both at a national level, industry level, and generally on a cybersecurity information and collaboration level. CSIRT.global is a not-for-profit. It's based in the Netherlands. You work internationally, I think, or you report internationally. Give them some love. I will link to all the concepts, all the sites, or as many as I can think of that we mentioned in this conversation in the video description. I invite everybody to also please visit cybersecurityadvisors.network. That's our website. I'll link to that below as well. And if you have any topics that you'd like to suggest for some of these video conversations, again, our objective is to bring interesting people with something to say that's relevant to the current state of the cybersecurity sector. We'd love to hear from you. Please, the usual YouTube stuff, like and subscribe, and check out Avard. I'll link to his LinkedIn profile. And I want to thank you very much for taking the time today to talk to me. It's been great catching up again. And now that we're in touch again, I hope that we'll not spend another 6 or 7 years not hearing from each other.
For sure. Thank you so much for having me, John. It was an absolute pleasure.
My pleasure. Best of luck to you.
You too.